on? Hello, everybody. How are you? You should know that sometimes in the virtual world, you find yourself in another room and you're like, wait a minute, where is everybody in the waiting room? And you find out that you and your team are in the wrong place. But now we're in the right place. And that is what matters. Is Dr. Hunt here, the one and only Melissa? Oh, there she is. Cool. All right.
I am here.
Whew, that's good. That was going to be very existential. If we all made it over and you did not, I would feel sillier than usual, which would be very next level. So welcome everybody. Are we already recording? Okay, awesome. Okay, well, you know the drill. It's an Irrational Labs event. You're here. We're here. It's going to be fun. We have Dr. Melissa Thomas Hunt, who said she's not Dr. Hunt. She's all like, I'm MTH. She's like, I'm Melissa. I said, I'm Snuggles. I'm the artist formerly known as Asterisk. I'm actually the Irrational Labs logo. We were trading names the whole time we were in the other room by ourselves. But you'll know her as Melissa by the end of today because you'll feel so included by her talk today on Inclusion Unlocked. Yes, that's right. How to really enable DEI in team. Not how to do it bootleg style. This is how to get it done right. She just co-authored a book, Inclusion Unlocked, a guide for leaders to act. And it is going to be exciting and it is happening now. But with that, you know who we are probably, maybe, but it's on the top of my screen. We're Irrational Labs. We've worked with hundreds of top organizations to bring the behavioral design approach into their processes. We're not superheroes, but if we were, I heard that superheroes have a thing called origin stories. So our origin story would come from Google. About a decade ago, we built out all the BE teams, or I should say we founded the BE business unit at Google and worked with over 25 teams to design test interventions there. We've run over 100 experiments and we've trained thousands of people in the magic and mystery of behavioral design. That's right. So what do we help people with? 3 ways to use behavioral insights to innovate and grow. 1, helping your product design be awesome, helping B-side training and AI strategy. Yes, these are the areas that we make your brain grow. And I love that. I just saw this icon for the first time. I love the dot connected brain, and I'm actually obsessing over how much I like that icon. So we help connect the dots in your brain with your product, with your people. This is what most companies use Irrational Labs for, but that's not what we're here for today. Today, we're going to talk with Dr. Hunt. And yes, she is Distinguished Professor of Business Administration at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. And Melissa, I just read an article yesterday. Do you know UVA is in the news now for something very exciting? Do you know what this is?
We are often in the news for something exciting. Which thing are you referring to?
Look at you go all in on that. I mean, you're a wildcat, you're a tiger, but you're going to go all in for your Virginia people. No, the women's Olympic swimming team is like half the team is going to be Virginia swimmers.
I had heard that. I didn't know it was half the team. I had heard they did really well. That's super exciting.
Yeah, I'm prone to hyperbole. It's probably just like a 20th of the team, but whatever. I mean, it's a lot of women from UVA.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the stat, but she's the former head of global diversity and belonging at Airbnb, a little company you may have heard of, where she led the strategy and execution of their global diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging programs, and retains an external senior advisor role there focused on advancing connection, like the brain thing we saw earlier, and belonging research. Prior to being at Airbnb, this is a woman that's done things. She's had several positions focused on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion at academic institutions. And for 25 years, she's been conducting and publishing research on the factors that unleash, see that hand gesture, unleash, leverage, and amplify the contributions made by individuals, particularly women, underrepresented individuals, and numerical minorities in organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so unfun that we can't have a massive, massive round of applause, but drop some emojis. Give Dr. Hunt your best emojis, your silliest emojis, and your claps, whatever you got. Melissa, thank you for joining us here today. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much, Ryan, for that wonderful introduction. I need to say that Airbnb is deep in my heart. I no longer have an external advisory role with them, but I am very, very fond of all of my former colleagues and teammates there and the work that they do.
Awesome. Well, and how are things going at UVA? How is the business? Are you making the business school a better and happier place?
Well, it's probably best to ask other people. I try. I feel very useful. On top of being a faculty member and doing my research and teaching leadership topics, I also get to look after our 700 MBAs that are part of our residential MBA program in Charlottesville. So they keep me very busy, and they're amazing individuals who are smart and kind, and it's a really wonderful community of dedicated learners.
So how do you end up at UVA? I mean, what's the pathway to the business school? Tell us the backstory here.
Okay, so I'm a boomerang faculty member at UVA. I've been on the faculty twice. So the first time I came was in 2009, and I had been at WashU on the faculty at the Owen School, and then I was at Cornell at the Johnson School for 9 years. And then I came down to UVA and to Darden more specifically. And Darden, focuses very heavily on pedagogy. Like the quality of the questions that we ask in the classroom is very, very important, and we're really systematic. And I had 8 years on the faculty, and then had an opportunity to go to a couple of other places, Vanderbilt, and then also to Airbnb. Needed to be super high, and I knew a place where we did a really great job at the top of the funnel of training individuals to be superior. And I was fortunate enough to find my way back to Dartmouth 3 years ago.
So, Melissa, really quickly, this is please hold. We're experiencing technical difficulties. I think you are a little glitchy. Your Wi-Fi might be. Hopefully, it's not just me. If people could let me know in the chat how we're doing there with the connection. Yeah, it's glitchy. Let's see how. Okay, good. It's not just me. Although it could just be me. You never know. So let's monitor it, and there might be a world where we have you log out and log in. Sometimes that does the magic. But so you
Okay.
find your way back to Darden, and tell us then how you come to focus. There are many things happening in a business school. How do you come to focus on inclusion, and specifically to this book, Inclusion Unlocked?
Yeah, my journey to focusing on inclusion started a long time ago. I was interested in groups and teams, and realized that a lot of the work that had been done on groups and teams really assumed that there was no status hierarchy in them, that theoretically everybody's knowledge, everyone's contribution should be valued equally. And I think all of us know that that's not really the way it works in groups and teams. But there are powerful mechanisms for getting the work done that we need to do in organizations. And so if we're not using everyone's expertise, we're leaving a lot on the table. And so I started to try and understand what happens. What are the status hierarchies that emerge, and how does that affect the ways in which experience and expertise gets used? And we found that individuals who have characteristics that convey lower status in our society, even when they're experts, their expert information is less likely to be used by the groups, and that has real performance outcomes for those groups. And so that's how I started on this, really understanding what happens in teams. How do we leverage the human potential, the knowledge that we have at our disposal, towards performance outcomes ideal in organizations?
So we talked in our pre-meeting when we were kicking it without everybody, in the VIP room, uh, where nobody was. But can you put a finer point on that? So can you give an example? Like, so what does that look like in an organization? Can you kind of tell a story that illustrates this, where you have this knowledge that's untapped?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of us that we go into a room. Perhaps, we know the individuals that are colleagues of us, or we don't know them particularly well, so they don't know our area of expertise. We want to make a contribution, and so a topic comes up where we have something to say, and we jump in, and the conversation keeps moving. Right? No one acknowledges what we said, in part because maybe we said something that was different from the general direction in which the group conversation was going. And oh, by the way, expertise means that we know something that other people don't know. But there's some individuals who are not expected to be experts. And when you're not expected to be expert and you say something different, like you say, the time frame should be shorter, or it should be longer, or the financials don't work, or we need to incorporate a more diverse array of individuals in our sample as we're testing the product, people often don't listen. And so, but the net of it is that if we're not actually leveraging the expertise of the people who are in the room, then the assembly of groups that we've put together are not functioning at maximum potential. And that's bad for organizations.
Yeah, and listening to you talk and reading about you, it sounds like you have a very, very I think people have a narrow definition of diversity, equity, inclusion, and it sounds like you have a much more holistic definition of inclusion. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I really think about inclusion as being the thing that I do to make sure that others feel that they are a part of an entity, whether it's a team, whether it's an organization, at an institutional level, and even part of society. Often people talk about inclusion as being sort of the state of being, but I take it more as an active a thing that individuals can do. Like you can create inclusion. You can include others. You make them feel like they're a part of it, so that they feel valued, they feel respected, they feel like they can make a meaningful contribution. And ideally, if you engage in activities of inclusion, then the people around you feel like they belong.
So essentially, you're jumping a little ahead in my thinking here, which I'm obviously such a
Sorry.
slow thinker. I know it's like, oh, I'm ahead of Ryan. What a shock! But what are some strategies that people can use for inclusion? If you had to give me your top three things people should be doing on the regular?
So they should listen, right?
What?
They should
What?
listen to
Sorry,
others.
that was
They
my
should.
best dad joke. Best dad joke.
No, they should listen to what people are saying. And you should also, so you should listen to what people are saying. You should also watch for when people are saying things and they're getting railroaded, they're not getting heard. And we should be prepared to use our voices and to stand up and to say, I want to roll back. Melissa said this thing and we didn't comment on it. Let's have a conversation. Or Melissa said that and then Ryan said it again and we all went in that direction. But let's go back to the fact that Melissa said it, right? So inclusion has to do with being bold and being courageous and taking some risks, but you're doing it on behalf of others. And when you do that, when you model that behavior, others feel empowered to do it as well. And you begin to create a culture where people stand up for one another, where they value one another, where even across the myriad of differences that we have, that people are seen for the knowledge that they bring, for their lived experiences, for their unique perspectives. And I'd also say, in order to be inclusive, you have to be curious, right? We have to want to know more about other people. It becomes when you ask questions of other people, what it says to them is that you are interested in them, that you think they have something to contribute, you're interested in their path. And that creates an environment that is inclusive. It facilitates people feeling like they belong and that individuals want them to be there.
So to recap, I heard three things, I think. Let's see how I did. Let's see how my listening skills are. My wife would say terrible, so hopefully you'll grade me higher. Number one, listen very carefully because there are always interesting voices and new ideas in the room. Number two, support ideas, especially when you hear them getting railroaded or marginalized. And number three, and Ted Lasso would be proud for those that are Ted Lasso fans in the room, but you have to be curious, right? You always kind of have to be interested in kind of lived experience and knowledge that people bring to the table that you may just not know about. Just say you don't know.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so
those are three good starting points.
Okay, well, I'm sure you have a top 10, but we're just going for the top three now because I didn't want you to show off this early in the talk. Three just kind of keeps it manageable. You know what I mean? But then with that, what are some misconceptions you found in your research that people have about inclusion? This is a politically fraught issue, and I'm making a face because it shouldn't be, but it is. So
Yeah.
where are some of the speed bumps in the road?
Yeah, so first of all, I think when we say inclusion, I mean, when there are a whole host of words now that when we say them, lots of individuals shut down because they think that they are automatically not included in the conversation. And that is inherently untrue. You can't have inclusion if any of your stakeholders feel as though they are not that they are not wanted there, that they are not valued in that. And so I think that's a huge part of it, so that, you know, we think that inclusion is only for certain groups. Now, the reality is that historically, in lots of different places around the world, but we could say in the, you know, in the United States, that there are individuals who have been left out of key conversations and key opportunities. And so a lot of the work on inclusion has focused on why has that happened, and how can we bring them in, and how can we value them and leverage their expertise. I think part of the trouble also is that we never name that so I'm a negotiations professor also, so I see things through a negotiation lens, and we often think we're negotiating that there's a fixed pie and we divide it up. And so lots of times when we think about inclusion, people are like, well, I was here, like, and other people who look like me or aren't like me were here before. If other people are being invited in, if they're being included, then that means that I don't have a space, right? And that means there are feelings of threat and fear, dismay. And I think part of the challenge is that we don't name that. Those are real feelings. And if you don't name it, then you can't work through it. You can't find alternative ways to make people feel included, to understand how they participate and they benefit in the process of inviting other people in.
So you did just add a fourth strategy. You have to name the challenges. I'm keeping count for the record.
Okay.
and I'm wondering what your BATNA is for this this discussion today. So since you're a negotiator, that was my only nerdy negotiating acronym, ladies and gentlemen, for today. But speaking of that, then so what are these obstacles that organizations, like, what are the common barriers that organizations face, and then what are strategies to get around them beyond naming things?
So I think part of it is that individuals just they're concerned that there's a risk associated with embracing this perspective. They don't know, they're fearful that they're going to make mistakes. And in organizations, I think we have put a lot of pressure on a lot of managers, leaders, people to be experts in DEI. We don't expect everyone to be an expert in finance or in marketing or in accounting. We recognize that the skill is a muscle that people spend a lot of time. But what do? We invite individuals who are experts in to consult with us, to advise us, and we take their advice. And so I think part of it is that we have, you know, there's a certain level of competence and inclusion that one, as just being a good leader, you have, but there are nuances to it, and we need to be willing to partner with people across our organizations who have more expertise. So one of the things is that we don't do it. Another thing that we do is that we take a really shortcut performative approach to this. And part of this is because we often feel behind the eight ball. When we start to focus on it, it's because some type of situation or crisis has emerged and we have to deal with it immediately. But creating an inclusive environment, being an inclusive leader, it's not a switch that you flip. Like, it takes practice and study and making mistakes and recovering from those mistakes. And so we often throw like fast things at it, like, what workshop can we throw? You know, what unconscious bias training can we get? And, like, to be clear, like, unconscious bias training, where we help create an awareness that we all have biases, is true. But what I know from my own research with Michelle Duguid is that we actually give a pass to people. When we told people over the last 5 to 10 years that everyone is biased, that we've actually created a descriptive norm that everyone is biased. And so we do the thing, there's no motivation to work against that. We actually have to start talking about the people who do the really hard work of working against their biases, and if we're going to try and get the masses of people to try and work against their biases. But instead, it's easier to say, we've put on this many workshops, we've done this many things, and so that can be a problem. Some of the substantive things that I've seen done are really beginning to interrogate processes, like looking across and doing an audit. What do we do well? What do we still have opportunity to improve? So that can range from our talent management processes. How do we bring people into the organization? What does that pipeline or funnel look like? What is the array of people that start at the top of the funnel? Does it map onto society? Does it map into the marketplace? What happens as they pass through the various iterations of the hiring process? Where are we losing them? What's going wrong? What are the friction points? To figure that out, our assessments really not assessing the things that are toggled to the job. And then, of course, when people are there, how are we setting them up for success? Like, when people come into the organization and they come from groups that have not been historically represented. They may not have relationships with other people. How do they learn the tacit norms? How do they learn what the currency is in the organization? So when you put structures in place so that every single person who comes in has a systematic way of learning the culture, of learning what's important, learning the way things happen, you begin to unleash the potential of all people. We then have to talk about pay equity, and not just salaries, but looking at, equity compensation and other forms of compensation. There are a myriad of things, and we have to look at performance evaluations, the language that are differentially used depending upon the characteristics of an individual, and what are the promotion practices, and how does one get promoted? Who gets the stretch assignments? There are a whole host of really positive things, but I think the most important thing is that you have to have individuals that are committed to this. It usually starts at the top, and when individuals at the top are really committed, then they put in accountability measures, and those accountability measures mean that there's going to be review. There's going to be systematic questioning of how a team is doing, who's coming into the team, how is it performing, how are people being developed, all of those things.
So what you just dropped a million things that I want to dive into a little bit deeper, but without burning any NDAs. I mean, can you tell us? So you actually went through the whole funnel from the top of the funnel to like someone getting promoted to CEO there, like in 2 minutes. It was incredible. Can you tell us a story about an organization, you can name them or not, that's done a stellar job at the top of the funnel with recruitment and what they did to really make sure they were inclusive at the top of the funnel?
Yeah. So there are lots of organizations that are trying really hard, right? But we then have external shocks to the system that then refocus attention off it. And this happens, there's no one particular firm company that I'm referring to. Whenever there's a fear that, profits are on the line or the economy isn't great, people tend to go back to what they know. And for most people, it's not the DEI stuff, right? They think that we have to retreat to sort of like our core and our focus, and lose sight of the fact that the differentiator could actually be who we're bringing into the organization. And so I have seen snippets in a lot of different places, from casting, not only just going to a wide array of places and fostering relationships with different associations that happen to different demographic groups, but it really becomes like, what's the relationship that gets nurtured with each and every person that's brought through the process? Like, how are they treated? How are they meant to feel? Are they valued? Do they feel, in the tech realm, we spend a lot of time, with software engineers. Do they feel as though does each and every person that is doing a technical assessment, are they made to feel like they could succeed there? Or are they made to feel like they're just trying to prove that they can sort of tread water? Because whether they get the job or not, that feeling and the way they were treated, we sometimes call it interactional justice, can impact how long they want to stay there, whether they tell other people that they should come and seek employment at the firm. So there are a myriad of things, but I think often we say, we're going to go and we're going to recruit at a certain type of school because we think that there's a more diverse array of people there. That's fantastic. But actually what you have to do is you have to cultivate relationships. You have to know that the individuals, you have to build trust, because sometimes, it's a one and done, but you have to show up repeatedly. You have to demonstrate that we want you in this organization. And that's really hard work, because there's so many touch points that it really becomes a cultural norm that you have to instill about how we welcome people in, how we engage with people in our organization.
That's really, really helpful. And how do you measure then, because a lot of this stuff is tangible and a lot of it's intangible. So what metrics do you help organizations put in place to be able to say, hey, we're succeeding or we're not? And where do the intangibles fit in? Because a lot of it is, there is a lot of culture that's a vibe, right? I mean, you go into a place and it feels good and people are happy, and we're not all pressing happy buttons, every 5 minutes to measure
Yeah.
that. Right?
Yeah. So I'll start with the vibe place, right?
Okay.
I'll start with the vibe.
Bring the vibe.
So okay, so there's a vibe, and often there are sentiment surveys, right? Employment surveys that get done. Sometimes they're called pulse surveys because they're short and they're done on a monthly basis. Other times they're done twice a year, or even once a year. And the practice is typically to look in aggregate at the high level across employees, maybe by country, by geography, to see, how do people feel, like their engagement scores? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel psychologically safe? A myriad of of things that are linked to intentions to stay and often to performance and productivity. The reality is that unless we disaggregate that data and we look at subgroup populations, we don't actually really know what's going on, right? Because the aggregate scores, the averages, mask what the differential experience that people may be having. And so what you actually have to do is you have to disaggregate that data. You need to look at it. You have to look at, women versus men in the gender binary globally. You have to look, if you're looking within country, and it becomes difficult, in countries that have GDPR, because they don't always have access because they can't collect the demographic data. But in the United States, where we can collect the data, you have to look, there are differences in the sense of belonging, and really unpack and begin to understand the hope that we're going to close those gaps. So it's not that just that our overall sentiment scores are high, but that we know that there's no divergence in those scores.
Uh-oh. We may have frozen, Melissa. It may have happened. Let's see here. This is where I say, please hold. I wonder if Melissa can hear us. Oh, nope, she's gone. She's coming back. Well, ladies and gentlemen,
I'm back.
Oh, you're back. You're back. Cool.
I'm back. I'm back.
Hold on. Let me spotlight you. Because now you're
usually
all
I get a warning. Usually, like, I would get a warning that my internet's unstable, but it's not saying that. But I did switch networks.
Cool. Well, I was gonna say, is it safe to infer then, and I'm laughing, that lots of people don't bother to do the disaggregation? And then I rolled my eyes as well, if you didn't catch that.
Okay.
Would you say that's a common mistake?
I would say in a lot of realms of my life, I have had to encourage the disaggregation.
Oh my gosh.
And I've also seen lots of places embrace it.
Okay. Oh, well, that was very yin and yang of you. Nicely done. So that's the pulse thing, and that's the disaggregation. And then there's some challenges with collecting that data, depending where you are geographically, and depending on the cultures that you're working in. So what are some other metrics then, beyond the pulses, that we can look at that are of great value?
Yeah, you could. So a lot of this actually goes to, and I know not all firms are large enough that they have people analytics groups, but to the extent that there are people analytics groups, this is where the skill really exists to do very deep, social science analysis to do it. And, in most of the organizations we're in, we pay attention to the data. But I think in this realm, we're often afraid to look at the data, but we have to look at the data because you can't fix what you don't know exists. And so, some of those places, when we started talking about hiring, really is looking at who comes into the process, like, and at what points do they drop off, and looking at the difference in demographics to begin to see like what might be the friction points that are differentially impacting some groups versus other groups. We also have performance evaluations. And so we can also look at and cut that data and look, are there systematic, are there divergences in where individuals from certain groups are ending up in getting higher performance evaluations? Are they aggregated in the lower? Are they stuck in the middle? What does our performance evaluation process look like, and how may it be driving those outcomes that we are seeing? And then also looking at the promotion data, right? Who's getting promoted, who's not? Some organizations promote more regularly, others have wider spans of control, and therefore promotions take place over longer periods of time, which means that when there are promotions, they're even more meaningful. And so if there are divergences in who's getting promoted, then it really can have significant impacts on people's career trajectories. So there's a myriad of data that we look at. Our friends in human resources or in the people side of it are always looking at people data. And that's why, and increasingly they are becoming attuned to issues of inclusive leadership and leveraging the data that they have at their disposal so that they can really identify where there are challenges and where there are great opportunities. The other thing I'd say, so yes, the data, but there are other things. Typically when we look at that, we do see divergences in promotion rates and performance evaluation. This is not unique to, it's not academia, it's not tech, it's across organizations. So you have to think about how do we mitigate it? And some of that is that there are very talented individuals who get brought into the organization, but they don't get seen, or they don't know what the currency is. So they don't know how to get seen. They don't know how to demonstrate that they're making a difference. So identifying individuals who can be sponsors of those individuals, and having robust processes such that the sponsors are individuals who are highly respected and successful at the company, and building a very structured program with clear explanations of how you're to engage with your sponsee, and checking in and having accountability processes. I've seen that work extraordinarily well. Even with individuals who never would have thought that they would have been necessarily great sponsors, or particularly sponsors with an inclusive leadership lens. Like, the specificity and giving structured guidance can be really helpful, because people are often afraid and they don't want to do the wrong thing. So we have to actually we have to build the muscle for them, and help provide those guidelines.
Oh, that's so great. So I was actually going to start asking about both mitigation tactics and interventions. So having a sponsor is a very powerful intervention. What are some other really powerful interventions that you've seen?
Yeah. So one is, it goes back to this mission of listening, and listening across the broad base of the organization. Many organizations now have employee resource groups that have different levels of identity associated with them, as well as allies. It becomes incredibly powerful to have senior leadership engage deeply in listening to the members of those employee resource groups, spending time with them, bringing the leaders in for counsel, both on the temperature read on how employees are feeling, but also sometimes there are real product and business decisions that they can be helpful with. So one is really elevating the role of employee resource groups, making sure they have resources so they can provide support to their members, and build community, but so that they can also have their voices elevated and they can feel like they're participating and helping to move the organization, the company forward. So that's one. Another one that is really important is having great internal communications. And this is one that I really did not appreciate until I was actually at Airbnb. Now I know communications is important. Like, I've known that, but like understanding the ways in which, from a central team that's producing ideas and education and has a philosophy of that, how do you cascade that? How do you get business leaders to be able to incorporate that into their all hands, into their newsletters and their communications, their Slacks, when that's not their area of expertise? If you have a great internal communications mechanism, then you literally begin to have tentacles into the organization. I sometimes say you can put words in leaders' mouths, and I don't mean that in an undermining way, because these are leaders who really want to say the right thing, but they're focused on the things that the company really wants them to be focused on. They are not experts in like how they choose their words carefully, but they are more than willing to take assistance and advice. And so if you have internal communications that can help to cascade what's going on in the organization, and then that can get embedded in the places where they're talking to the people in their organization, you can literally change the culture and the climate in ways that otherwise there could be lots of activity going on that would be viewed positively, but if our employees don't know about it, they don't perceive that there's any change or any benefit.
So just a quick commercial interruption to those gathered here with us today. We are going to pivot to an open Q&A. So I do see some questions coming in from some new folks and some of our usual suspects, Sharon, which is exciting. So please do start pulling the questions in there, and I'll bring you on the mic to ask your questions as per Irrational Labs tradition. But before we go there, a few more questions for you, Melissa. We do have, you may guess, we have some tech folk in the mix here today. So we've talked a lot about data and diving deep into the data. But even going a shade away from data and just saying technology in general, what role does, we want to talk about two technology pieces. Like, one, what role does technology play in general around helping with inclusion? And then two, what of the hybrid workplace and inclusion? So first, technology writ large, and then two, what has your research revealed in this new weird post-pandemic, the new normal, I should say, in our remote meeting today?
Right. So I think technology can help in that it forces us to be more deliberate, right? We know that if we are trying to, in our teams, if we're trying to inculcate psychological safety, if we're trying to be curious, or we're trying to know and underscore, then we have to be even more thoughtful about it. When we're face to face, we often don't think about it. Now, the counterbalance to that is when we're face to face, we have more opportunities. We bump into each other. We can see, what meetings are going on. We can have side conversations. We can get to know each other better. But we often don't think, because we're together, that we need to be deliberate. So we can get a little bit sloppy in how we listen to people, how we underscore what they have to say. But if we're paying attention to the technology, and we all went through this, not that long ago, I guess 3 years ago, we had to really think about how are we going to be deliberate? How are we going to create community and belonging when we couldn't reach out and be with one another? So I think technology can be a reminder to us that we can be more deliberate, whereas when we don't have that, we often slip into sort of just, habits that are not often inclusive. I will say that, technology, you can build community, but it's often great if you can punctuate it with face-to-face interactions. There's almost no substitute for every so often being able to gather, to share a meal with individuals, and to really solidify bonds. But there are people who I hired onto my team on Zoom and who I actually didn't see in person until after I was no longer at Airbnb. And it was almost shocking because the level of engagement and intimacy was such that when I saw them in person, I almost forgot that I had not seen them in person while they had been on my team. Right. So there are ways to do it, but we have to be deliberate about it. I would say, there are also, when we start talking about product, there are all sorts of conversations now about inclusive products and how do we think about it. And so that's a really important place, because that really has to do with our business outcomes. Are we serving the full range of populations? And in order to do so, we have to have people who can flag, who are we leaving out? Who does this product not serve? Is it accessible enough? And so the internal sort of demography, or DEI, has implications for how well the business can actually do. And then I'll say, one of the ways that has been most powerful in talking and educating people on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has been through theater. And I first saw this in the academic realm, where you would have actors who would take on roles and engage in some type of conflict-ridden situation, and then the audience would get to engage with the individuals in character. And so you could literally jump into someone's head and understand what they were thinking or what they were trying to communicate. It was very powerful, but that's really hard to do at scale. But there are companies like Praxis Labs that are using technology to create similar types of opportunities for people who don't have a given lived experience to really literally step into the embodiment of someone else and see how they're treated. What are the things that happen outside the awareness of most people? And then have conversations and reflect upon it. So I think that technology can be a huge unlock to helping us all get closer to the experience of others by being able to put ourselves in their shoes.
Wow, that's a very hopeful take on technology, and I think one that everybody here is excited to hear. So thank you so much. Before we go to Q&A, I just want to ask you, kind of on a real personal note, was there a moment in your academic, professional, or just life where you saw an intervention that that kind of that moment where something happened that almost brought a tear to your eye? You were like, wow, that I never thought would happen, and it did.
So what I will say is that when I've been in conversation with individuals one-on-one at all levels in the organization, and I've asked them about their experience of belonging, and times where they felt like they belonged, and then times where they felt like they didn't belong. There are times where it has evoked tears in those individuals in a way that I didn't expect and they didn't expect. I think the thing to understand is that in asking people about when they felt like they belonged, it can bring joyous and unexpected memories back. The people who were generous and kind and invited us in when we weren't expected, or other people hadn't invited us in. And then it can also bring out when we really felt off to the side. And by getting us to be in touch with the times where we didn't feel included, where we didn't feel we belonged, it then makes us more sympathetic and prompts us to look for situations where people are not being included and to find ways to include them. I was sitting in my office last night doing work and preparing for our conversation. And a colleague of mine who I don't know very well just came by my door. It was pretty empty. It was after 6 o'clock in the summer. And we just started having this conversation. He initiated the conversation. And the appreciation that I felt and the value that I felt in being his colleague, because he took the time to have a conversation with me, will go miles. I think the thing that we also have to realize is that it only takes a moment to erode belonging. You only have to do one thing to someone and they can feel really bad. And it takes a long time and multiple consistent interactions to build belonging. But each moment can be cherished. And we all as leaders, and I use that as like I say, there are big L leaders and there are small L leaders. We each have the capability to make someone feel seen and heard, and that will come back to us. We don't do it because it'll come back to us, but it will come back to us. The loyalty and dedication that people have when you see them, when you take an interest in them, is really powerful. They work harder, they're more productive, they pay it forward. Other people see those behaviors.
Well, I'm hearing lots of L's. I'm hearing leaders, I'm hearing loyalty, I'm hearing listening, and I'm hearing love. And I've loved listening to you today, Melissa. This has been spectacular. But we're not done yet. We're not done yet, because we're going to bring my BFF in Seattle. That's right, Sharon. Are you there? Good, Sharon, you're there. Sharon, can you ask your important question of Melissa?
Hi, BFF Ryan. Good to see you.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Melissa, I love this topic and looking forward to reading your book. I loved what you said about inclusion is really about a set of activities. And in behavioral science, we tend to look at what is the behavior, what are the that we can measure and see changes. And I was curious if you found through the work that you've been doing, maybe even on a client side, a behavior change that was measurable that we could create interventions around. I struggle a little bit with how do we activate inclusion with activities and then measure it so we can see how we're doing.
Sharon, thank you so much for the question. I have to confess, like I am a huge fan of irrational labs and behavioral insights. And so much of my inspiration has come from working for members of the irrational labs team. And so you are spot on. I focus a lot on connection. We often, we talk about the loneliness epidemic, but like more fundamentally, I see connection as being like, the other side of synergistic with advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion and being an inclusive leader. How do we find ways to connect with people? How do we offer help to them? How do we provide support? How do we, all of these are behaviors that we can engage in as inclusive leaders. And these, what seemingly small acts really pay large dividends in going forward. So I think you're absolutely right. Like we can unpack this into behaviors that can move the needle.
Great, thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And while we're at it, everybody, I'm dropping the link to her book in the chat. I tried to find it on bookshop.org because, I was trying to be cool, but I got the Amazon link, so it is what it is. A for effort. But with that, Helen, can you come off mic and ask your question? It's a great one.
Sure, thank you. I have worked mostly for small companies, and thank you for taking the time to share with us and really provide this insight. But small companies can't afford, a DEI or belongingness expert. What would you say are the single or few behaviors that could be encouraged by the organization's leadership to enhance DEI and belonging without having maybe all the infrastructure?
Yeah. So I would say encourage people to get to know one another, particularly if you're a leader of a team. Like take the time to have one-on-ones, and not just focus on the immediate work that needs to get done. Ask them how they're doing, ask them what their aspirations are, ask them what their challenges are, ask them what they need help with. Ask them how they got to be here. You may know that story, you may not know that that story. But really systematically building the relationships can be very, very, very powerful. And when individuals feel like they know each other, they feel more connected, then you can begin, they feel supported. They also feel more comfortable saying when things are not working well for them, when someone has made a slight, when in a team's, let's say there was a conversation and you as the manager didn't actually catch what actually took place. That person, because of the relationship that's been fostered, will come to you and say that. So I'd say take the time to get to know the people who are on your team, listen to them, check yourself and say, who am I advocating for? Who am I giving opportunities for? Is it a broad array? Who needs me to invest in them? Who do I need to lend my status to and to promote in conversations and for other opportunities?
Thank you.
I have a question, as we do have time for one more. So if anybody has a question, drop it in the chat and we'll definitely bring you forward. But I will ask, are there any dimensions of inclusion that you find are often overlooked? Meaning, I mean, people always think, or I should say people often, when we say inclusion, people often think race, gender, ethnicity. But are there other dimensions of inclusion that are often like forgotten about?
Yeah, so I mean, a huge one that there's increasing conversation is about disability or disability status, the degree to which people identify as members of the disability community. That is one that is often overlooked, and it's also one that once you overcome some individuals' initial discomfort with the topic, it is not as laden and doesn't evoke as much of a defensive posture as talking about some of the other dimensions of difference. But yet the same prescriptions for how you engage and support members of that community can apply more broadly in creating an inclusive workplace. And so it's also, disability is a cross-cutting identity and categorization. So it becomes a window into connecting even more broadly while embracing disability from an inclusion perspective. So I would say that is one. We know gender identity and LGBTQI plus communities. We also know increasingly there's conversations about political ideology and that being a dimension that divides. And that can be a really charged one. I encourage people to be really mission focused and to think about what is it that we're trying to advance by taking an inclusive perspective, and what are the friction points. And part of the friction points are if we're not bringing other people along, if they're feeling left out and behind, we're not going to get to the place that we want. And so we have to think more expansively about how we truly can be more inclusive. That doesn't mean we have to agree with one another, but like, what are the systematic ways that we are further marginalizing populations because it doesn't serve the work that we're trying to do.
Well, so that's interesting, right? Because you start talking about cross-cutting issues, and mission is also a cross-cutting issue, right? So this is the counterpoint. This is what brings us all together. And I would imagine the counterpoint of your work is like, let's find all these beautiful things that unite us in our human condition. Because at the end of the day, right, we're all human. And we're all here to attempt to make the world and our companies a better place on good days, right? So it's a very hopeful note to remember, especially in a politically divisive space. So this is incredible. Before I go to our wrap-in comments, we have the comedy portion of the show, which is, Melissa, you are the most color coordinated person by accident today. You'll note. She's got the black and white ensemble on, the perfect earrings, and then note her background, which looks like a Zoom background, but it isn't. Melissa, tell us why you look like you're on a set today.
So I will tell you, but it is a Zoom background, but I will tell you why.
Oh, I thought this was a showroom. I thought that was the showroom background.
No,
Oh,
so
okay.
you're causing me, Ryan, to like out myself. I'm in the middle of a renovation, which I was not supposed to be living in the middle of, but I am. And I do not have kitchen countertops. And so I needed to travel about an hour to get kitchen countertops. And I could not postpone it because I'm living in a kitchen that has no kitchen countertops or appliances. So I am live from my kitchen countertop place.
Well, well, and we want to be inclusive of people that don't have kitchen countertops. It's a very underlooked group. So thank you for joining us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. A couple parting comments here from the team at Irrational Labs. I always try to end at 5 minutes out because that's what responsible MCs are supposed to do. We have all kinds of exciting things to let you know. First of all, we have a relationship with Melissa because we work with her at Airbnb. We enjoy working with large companies. So should you want to do something like Melissa did with us, you can reach out to Amy at irrationallabs.com. If you're new to Irrational Labs events, which most of you probably aren't, but you can stay in the loop at that newsletter link that's in the chat. And Kristen, our CEO, rocks all the teardowns. That's at her Substack, also in the chat, kristenberman.substack.com. If you couldn't get enough of this, if Melissa was the best thing that happened to your Friday, it should be. Although, actually, I hope the rest of your Friday is good too. I mean, but this should be a highlight of your Friday. On Friday, June 28th, we've got more BSci action. So 3 behavioral science insights to improve your healthcare product. You want to get people happier, healthier? Come meet Dr. Juarez, one of our Irrational Labs consultants, the type of person that you may collaborate with if you work with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Hunt, it was an honor to have you. People, go get her book. Go get her, skim her book. I mean, you don't have to read it, just skim it. Read the table of contents. You'll learn things. Look at the figures and diagrams. Make Jeff Bezos wealthy. Buy the book. She won't get wealthy from the book. It's an academic book, right? You're not going to get wealthy.
It's the intersection of academia and practice.
That's right. It's a praxis book. Melissa, any other interesting stuff you want to let people know before they go besides listen and have empathy?
The only thing is that it only takes one of us. Like, we can all be inclusive leaders and we can model the behavior, and the ripple will cascade through our organizations. And, if we have resources to throw it, that's great, but we don't have to have lots of resources to engage as inclusive leaders and to impact the people around us in really profound ways.
Yeah, Melissa, it reminds me of that book. I think it was One Cup of Tea, about the guy who went around Afghanistan just having tea with people. I mean, it's that simple, right? It's breaking bread, it's having tea,
Right.
lending an ear, lending a heart. So thank you for lending your mind to us today. It was a joy and an honor, and we hope to see you again. Will you come back? We don't have cooties.
I will absolutely come back.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been great.
With a kitchen counter?
Yes, with a kitchen
Nice.
counter.
Well, good luck with the renovation, and we'll catch you soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Friday.